You're listening to the podcast of Iris Josephina. If you're passionate about exploring the menstrual cycle, cyclical living, body wisdom, personal growth, spirituality, and running a business in alignment with your natural cycles, you're in the right place. I'm Iris. I'm an entrepreneur, functional hormone specialist, trainer, and coach, and I am on a mission to share insights, fun facts, and inspiration I discover along the way as I run my business and walk my own path on Earth. Here, you'll hear my personal stories, guest interviews, and vulnerable shares from clients and students. Most people know me from Instagram, where you can find me under @CycleSeeds, or they have been a coaching client or student in one of my courses. I'm so grateful you're here. Let's dive into today's episode. Hey, Kelsey, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to chat with you.
Me too. And before we dive into the topic of today, which is the microbiome, I'm curious to know whether you could give us like a little intro on who you are and what your background is.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I am a licensed naturopathic doctor, which means that I went to an accredited medical school for many years. And there I trained kind of as a primary care provider. So, we learned pharmaceutical treatments for conditions, how to diagnose conditions, but then also herbal treatment options, homeopathy, nutrition. We kind of really did a deep dive into all the aspects of how to support the body. And my heart and soul has always really been in women's health, specifically fertility, pregnancy, and postpartum support. And as a kid, I never really wanted to be a doctor. I studied history and ethnic studies in my undergrad. And it was there that I took a class on motherhood, the history of motherhood. And it completely changed my life. Like, how often do we really look at the lens of society or culture from the perspective of the transition into motherhood? And I was really drawn to and inspired by that potent transformation around becoming a mother. Yes, for the person who's birthing the child, but also for the whole community. Like, how does a community shift and change when a new member is brought into the space? So my plan was to get a master's degree and travel the world researching and writing about how motherhood is experienced in different places of the world. And at that time, I was also studying to become a yoga instructor and had always, since I was a young girl, been really passionate about healthy foods, healthy eating, and living a more naturally based life. So I was studying for you know, graduate program test one day. And those moments when something just comes to your mind, like the thoughts just click, right? Those like big download moments where we feel like, oh my gosh, why haven't I looked at it this way before? This was one of those moments. And I realized that I didn't want to just go observe and write about the process of motherhood. I really wanted to go deeper into how to actually support families and community on that physical level. So I looked up naturopathic healthcare or naturopathic medicine, something I Googled at the time, and found the path of becoming a naturopathic doctor and haven't really looked back since. And while I was in school, I was, again, really interested in the process of pregnancy. I really was motivated at the time to stop taking birth control. I had been on birth control since I was 13 for really heavy periods. My pediatrician put me on birth control, and I'd been on it since. And I was having a lot of just kind of random health symptoms. I was having chronic eczema, migraines, fatigue, chronic constipation. And I was really convinced that stopping birth control would help with at least one of those symptoms. So I stopped birth control and nothing changed. Not only did my symptoms not improve, but my period didn't come back. And so naturally, I was concerned, right? We expect some shift to happen with our body, and it doesn't quite happen. So I started seeing a naturopathic doctor for myself who really educated me on so much. She highlighted for me that my hormone imbalance and lack of period wasn't really the problem. That was the symptom for what was going on. And there were many other underlying issues that needed support. And I had a significant bacterial overgrowth in my gut at the time, in my digestive system, called SIBO, or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and low digestive function. and my adrenal glands weren't working well. I had abnormal cortisol. I was teaching hot yoga 4 days a week. I was running. I was a big runner back then. I was in medical school. I was really burning the candle at both ends, if that was even an understatement for that time in my life. So we really worked on stress and optimizing my gut health and so much more. My periods came back healthier than ever. And over the course of that year, my eczema got better, my headaches went away, and I started having regular bowel movements for the first time in my life. And this all really led to my body being in a really healthy, vital place that I got pregnant with our first kiddo. And, to this day, I'm convinced, not only from my own experience, but from the hundreds of couples that I've supported in this process, that optimal health in the preconception window is a very important element to not only getting pregnant, but to having a healthy pregnancy, healthy delivery, and healthy postpartum transition. As we establish those healthy, nourishing routines for our body, creating a space to process mental or emotional experiences, and specifically support our fertility health, we're really setting ourselves up for this really transformative and potent season of motherhood.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Thank you so much for such an elaborate introduction. And I'm so pleased to hear that you were also in school learning about the history of motherhood and how motherhood is experienced in different cultures. Because my background is actually in cultural and medical anthropology. That's how I started.
Oh, amazing. I love
And
that.
during my final research, had a huge dilemma because I was there as a young girl. I was 22 years old,
Mhm.
and one of my informants was pregnant, and she said, "Okay, when the baby comes, you come with me, okay?" And I was like, okay, this is probably good for my data." I had no idea. I literally had no idea. And I ended up being present at the birth of her baby.
Wow.
So, this experience, obviously, as shifted my entire life. And that's how I decided to become a doula, because I wanted to do this hands on work and I wanted to be present and I wanted to not just observe and write, because
Mhm.
that was not doing justice to the entirety of the experience. And so I can very much relate to
Wow.
your experience.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that connection. It's so true. Being on the outside is beneficial. And of course, we love reading papers and we love analysis of situations. But yeah, being more hands on is also really fruitful.
Yeah, and it also helps the community, the support. Like when you're an observer, I had to choose, like, am I a participant observer, a participant and an observer and a scientist, like a social scientist, or am I going to be a woman standing next to this woman needing my hand right now?
Mhm.
So I completely understand your experience and also why you chose to be part of the more hands-on community support,
Mhm.
because I feel that that's where the real transformation happens. And then I think also your personal experience, you had an embodied experience of what it feels like when things are not quite right. And then
Mhm.
you also had this embodied experience of feeling the improvement and having the feedback of your body. And I feel that for a lot of people in our field, this is like such a beautiful motivation and drive and passion behind our work to support others, because we know where people are and where they can go.
Mhm.
So I always like when people have had their own fair share, even though it may have been hard. Um, it makes you someone people can trust, I feel. Yeah, thank you
Yeah.
for sharing all of that. And
Yeah.
you mentioned a little bit already how you got interested in the microbiome, and I'm sure this is also connected to your own journey with SIBO and the overgrowth and your own gut issues. And how did you get interested in the microbiome, like professionally?
Mhm. Yeah, I think this really started by my persistent focus on really wanting to find out the root cause of dis-ease in the body.
Mm,
So I began seeing in my patients and, doing a lot of research on how essential gut health is for overall health, particularly hormone balance, fertility, and reproductive health, but also skin health, cognition, mood, energy, sleep, and so much more. And looking at gut function as well as the microbiome, we can often find ways to support those imbalances that really helps support the whole body. Restoring health, the way
Mm.
I look at it at least, is really restoring health at one of the primary levels. And of course, there are other root causes to disease, but gut health is often a place I'm exploring with my patients. And I do see, even if it's not the thing that shifts everything, right? Usually there's multiple factors. It's one of the big elements that I find in just really optimizing health in general.
Yeah, completely agree. And just for people listening who are thinking like, what is the microbiome? Could you go into that a little bit and explain to us like what it is and why is it so important? Like you already touched upon it a little bit, but could you explain to people like what is actually the microbiome and why do we need it?
Yeah, in a very simplistic breakdown of it, the word microbiome really refers to an ecosystem of diverse bacteria. And when you speak of a microbiome, it's usually related to a particular area. So we have a microbiome for our skin. It's a different microbiome that's on the surface of our eye, that's in the vagina, that's in the gut. And there are similarities. We can have a crossover of certain bacterial species that are inhabiting different tissues, but really tissue, each area in our body will have its own individualized microbiome. So it's going to be, right, that diverse bacterial presence. And bacteria are really important. And this is something that I've been thinking on a lot lately, is that we think as humans we're clean and separate from and safe from, bacteria or microorganisms, but we wouldn't be able to survive without them in truth. Like we
Exactly.
need, it's
Yeah.
vital for our existence to have bacteria. So that's something I'm often educating my
And they
patients
literally
on
live in
too.
our bodies.
Exactly, and we want them there, we want to nourish them, we want to feed them. Yes, so that's really it's a complex topic, but I think when we understand how simple it is and that, it's an ecosystem. If we think of any other ecosystem, we need to have a symbiotic relationship within that ecosystem, and then there can be disruptions to the ecosystem that need to be shifted. That's really how I think of the microbiome and how I often explain it.
Yeah, beautiful.
Mhm. Yeah.
And we both spoke earlier about the preconception phase, how important that is, and then also pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. And I have like read quite a lot about the microbiome in relation to all these different cyclical phases of our lives. And I've also attended some workshops with Dr. Michel Audin, who speaks about it in so many beautiful ways. But I'm curious whether you could take us on a little journey and explain what the role of the microbiome is in relation to all of these different, very important phases of the growth of a baby. So, preconception, pregnancy, birth, and postpartum.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you say, those different phases are their own, but also globally, right? Part of the big transition that's happening in that season of life. So I'll kind of break down what's happening in each of those different times just to kind of zoom in on what's happening. So for preconception, having a stable gut function and a balanced microbiome really equates to being able to absorb and digest nutrients from all of the good food we're eating on a very introductory level. So many people, right, change their diet in some way when intentionally supporting their
Oh, you're breaking
preconception
up a little
health.
bit.
And
Could
often that's eating more vegetables or increasing antioxidants or increasing anti inflammatory foods, which are all really good shifts to make. But having a stable
yeah.
microbiome really helps to ensure that we're absorbing all of the nutrients from the good foods that we're eating. Like just acknowledge that we need good bacteria, we need bacteria to survive, we need certain bacteria to absorb certain vitamins. And without the presence of those bacteria, we risk vitamin or nutrient deficiency. And when there are imbalances in the microbiome, which I typically think of as like not enough good bacteria, maybe an overgrowth of bad bacteria to really simplify into like black and white phases here. When there are imbalances in the microbiome, this can lead to a lot of inflammation in the gut. So the immune system might be more heightened in its response because there is this imbalance in the ecosystem, in the microbiome. So the immune system gets the signal that there's something that it needs to do. There's, you know, inflammation or there's, bacterial overgrowth that it needs to fight off, if you will. And that can often lead to immune system changes that can cause inflammation and, other things that could be impacting fertility. So those are kind of the primary ways that I see the microbiome impacting preconception. And there are others, but I think as a starting point, those are really good ones to think about. And when it comes to pregnancy, research has shown that the maternal microbiome plays a role in healthy fetal development and even in preventing some common childhood health issues. And we see complications, particularly in the research in pregnancy, like preeclampsia, fetal growth restriction, gestational diabetes, excessive gestational weight gain, or premature birth have all been linked to having poor gut health or imbalances in the microbiome. And I think this is huge. And truthfully, I don't think there's enough research in these segments of this process. Like, we're not really studying maternal microbiome enough as we could be in terms of how it is impacting those conditions, but there's definitely a link within the research. And we also see that a stable maternal microbiome, so that's while the fetus is developing, can help prevent conditions, what's termed as atopy in children. So that's going to include things like asthma, eczema, and allergies. So the maternal microbiome, the space where, baby is developing, influences the fetal immune system. So going into pregnancy, right, with a balanced and stable microbiome can be a really great way to support or prevent any complications during the pregnancy, which segues nicely into how the microbiome impacts birth. So if the baby is able to be born vaginally, as they pass through that birth canal, they're exposed to the mother's microbiome. And it's more specifically, they're being exposed to the mother's vaginal microbiome. And this helps to inoculate baby's microbiome. So it helps to kind of start that process of exposure to baby from, bacteria that, again, the body needs to survive. And that also starts the process of, honing in some specific work for the baby's immune system as it's being exposed to, the outside world for the first time. So, a diverse microbiome can be one of the ways that we really help to prevent, any issues, any suboptimal function of baby's immune system. And then also preeclampsia, coming back to that, is, something that can impact the birth process or even postpartum, that immediate postpartum time where having, a rich and diverse microbiome is one of the ways that we can, put that little health insurance card in the process and see that we are supporting our body in a way that's nourishing our future baby. And then the postpartum, the big shift. Not really the big shift within the microbiome. There are definitely changes that we see, but really just the big overall shift, right? So some changes in the microbiome before or during pregnancy can impact the postpartum microbiome, and the postpartum time can also be its own experience. So I will say that this is, again, an area that needs more research. So understanding of the postpartum microbiome is something we're learning more about every day. One interesting nugget that we see is that women who develop gestational diabetes also experience a gut microbiome that is less diverse. And this can continue even after birth or the resolution of gestational diabetes. We see that, less than diverse, that more simplified microbiome. And yeah, the other big piece of the postpartum window, the postpartum season, is of course the big emotional shift that happens in this time. And yes, life is so different, and physical body is in a state of recovery. And we know that the gut plays a big role in our mood. Specifically, gut bacteria can influence our neurotransmitters, which are, the hormones signaling our mood. They're really like the substance for how we are experiencing our mood within our body. And the microbiome plays a big role in hormone metabolism, which hormones are drastically dropping in that immediate postpartum time. And during the first, couple of weeks of the postpartum window, we're really clearing out a lot of hormones. So, supporting a balanced and stable and really diverse microbiome can make that transition feel more supported. I see it all the time in my patients when we really work on gut health. The whole sequence of events. The pregnancy is smooth. Birth goes well most of the time. There are some things that are out of our control, of course, and then the postpartum time. I definitely see less emotional fluctuation and continual issues, if you will. If there are any challenges or complications in the pregnancy, those tend to resolve really simply postpartum. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing all of that. So
Yeah.
much wisdom and so much knowledge you have. And I especially think that two things, that this postpartum piece is so often forgotten. Like
Mhm.
people, to me, it seems that people are like, yeah, this postpartum period is like this entire mystery and it kind of like runs
Mhm.
you over like a truck and there's nothing you can do and you have no control over it.
Mhm.
But what you were explaining with the impact of our gut health on our neurotransmitters and on hormone clearance after birth, after the gigantic drop, it
Mhm.
makes so much sense that when we support the microbiome in the gut before we get pregnant and maintain that health all throughout pregnancy and birth, that we actually protect ourselves
Mhm.
postpartum. And another thing that I have been reading about a lot is the microbiome in the mouth and
Mhm.
how gum disease and periodontal issues impact how people give birth. And there actually has been a lot of research on that. It's even like talked about at dentist
Mhm.
offices in my country, in the Netherlands. Like they have these information sheets, like take
Wow.
care of your teeth because it's possible that it impacts like your baby, that there is a premature birth or low birth weight. So
Wow.
there is some improvement in some countries in that. And I mean, I'm very grateful that people are actually talking about this, but many people don't know. But for this part, the research has been like very clear.
I love that point so much. And yeah, oh my gosh, if we could have more just educational resources for women or, everyone, people with regard to how important, gut and oral health is for our overall health too. One of the like simplified ways that I think about this is that I think we forget that our mouth is actually part of our digestive system.
Yes, it's a
I was
start.
it's the start. I was taught in school if you were to like, open up your lip and see the inside of your gum, that like healthy red pigmented mucosa is what your entire digestive system looks like when it's healthy and vibrant.
Mm.
So if there are any imbalances in the mouth, if we have, chronic anything chronic that we're dealing with within our oral cavity, or we could be completely asymptomatic. That's the tricky part with the mouth. And we could still have a slight bacterial imbalance there that could be also transmitting to what's happening further down in the gut. hmm
Yeah, it's
So
so
cool.
important. Everything is connected.
Yes, it's so true.
So
Mhm.
if somebody has like microbiome issues, like what are some of the signs that our microbiome in our body is showing that points towards your entire digestive tract needing some attention? Like what do people look out for? Because sometimes when we have issues, especially like for your example, you've been constipated your entire life,
Mhm.
so it was your default, it was your normal, you didn't know anything else. So I feel that with a lot of these symptoms, they are so normalized that people are like, oh, I actually poop like this my entire life,
Mhm.
I didn't know that was wrong. So what are some of the things that people can look out for, that they can like start discovering like, oh, maybe my body may need some support?
Yes, I love that point because that's one of the things that also always saying is that just because it's something that's been around for a long time for you. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's healthy. And that my constipation was like such a perfect example because I would, it was just my normal, right? There was nothing wrong with it. So sometimes there aren't any specific symptoms, and I'm going to start with those first. Sometimes all of the other symptoms that we're having that aren't even related to our gut or our digestion, those are the biggest signs that there could be something off in the microbiome. And I'm talking about things like acne or eczema or psoriasis, any skin condition. I'm always starting with gut health because our skin is like an external representation of what's happening in our gut. So if there are any issues there, the gut is an important place to start with support. And then hormonal stuff as well, like irregular cycles, PCOS, lots of great research on the importance of microbiome or the impact the microbiome has on endometriosis, recurrent pregnancy loss, or even difficulty getting pregnant, right? Because it comes back to what we mentioned earlier and, yeah, all of the importance of the microbiome in that preconception period. And then I'll also add symptoms like anxiety, depression, or mood swings, right? Our gut is our second brain as well, is another way that we often refer to gut function. And we want to make sure that our gut is really stable and healthy and balanced for our mood to also be that way. And then insomnia, right? Sleep issues, fatigue, metabolic issues, trouble losing or gaining weight can all be symptoms that there are some imbalances in the microbiome. And then, of course, gut specific symptoms are also important to mention. So, like we've talked about constipation, it's, ideal to have a full, complete bowel movement every day. That is sort of my optimal, 1 to 2, maybe even 3 bowel movements a day. Diarrhea or too loose of stools can signal that there is some imbalances in the gut. Of course, things like gas or bloating, heartburn or acid reflux, undigested food in the stool. Those are all like specific signs from our digestive system that it needs a little bit more love and attention. And the last one that I'll add that I think is often overlooked too is food intolerances. So I've had so many patients over the years come in to see me eating a limited diet because when they stray away from those particular foods, their symptoms come back. And just avoiding the foods isn't going to be enough to really heal the gut or reestablish microbial diversity. It's sort of the band aid, right, on moderating symptoms, but that can be a really good sign from the body too that there are imbalances in the microbiome in the digestive function that could use some attention and tending.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing all of this. And I think it can give people a little bit of an idea about the direction that they can think in
Mhm.
or the symptoms that they can look out for. Do you have any recommendations for people who are trying to get pregnant but have issues with their microbiome? And maybe you can talk about the person getting pregnant, but also their partner. So,
Mhm.
male and female factor for both.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a lot of recommendations. The first one is to diversify the foods that you're eating. I usually recommend to aim for 6 to 9 servings of fruits and vegetables daily, primarily, mostly vegetables. And then on a larger scale, aiming to eat at least 30 different plant based foods per week. And spices and herbs count. And this is something you could absolutely do with your partner. Both of you getting on board with it will be even better for your fertility potential. And you can do it together in a team effort. Keep track of the foods that you're eating throughout the week and celebrate at the end of the week when you hit the goal of 30 different plant based foods a week. And this really helps to provide fuel for the microbiome, quite literally.
Mm,
Mhm. Another recommendation I often give is to really slow down during mealtime or when eating. And this is a really important one to make sure that we're in that rest and digest nervous system response state. So,
mm,
not watching TV or having challenging conversations or eating during work time, but you definitely deserve, right, the 10, 15 minutes to carve out a special individualized time for you to tend to your body and to really eat in a calm and relaxed environment. So that's one way that I think, at least here in America, in the States, right, we're constantly on the go, and slowing down to eat is something that is really transformative for a lot of my patients. Um, and then the other ones are to limit processed foods and opting for organic produce when possible. So, processed foods don't have as much fuel for the microbiome. um, I think of them as more like empty nutrients. And some research has also shown that pesticides can disrupt the microbiome. They basically work on the crops or on the plants, right, as an antimicrobial, and then we're consuming that, and that can disrupt our beneficial microbiome as well. And then also focusing on fiber. Fiber is essential fuel for the microbiome, getting a balance of both soluble and insoluble fibers in the diet. So, a blend of eating fruits with peels, things like apples and pears and grapes and blueberries, as well as, good veggies with fiber, our cruciferous veggies like broccoli, cauliflower, even carrots, avocados, all really good sources of fiber, nuts and seeds. There's so many. So that as we naturally shift, to eating more plant-based whole foods, we're naturally going to be increasing our fiber content. And then listen, if your symptoms are present or you're concerned or questioning whether you have symptoms, listening to your body is also like the best recommendation I can give, because your body is really smart. And I think of symptoms as little messages from our body that it needs a little bit of attention and tending to.
Thank you. These were all super good and also accessible tips. I feel like sometimes when we when
Mhm,
we get tips for the microbiome, it's so beyond what we can comprehend.
mhm,
And these tips are so accessible. We can do them from our own home
mhm,
and also do it together as a couple if we're on our preconception journey.
mhm. Yeah.
So thank you so much for sharing those with us.
Mhm.
Um, is there any final wisdom you'd like to share with our listeners, especially if they're maybe not knowing where to start or if they're thinking they may be struggling with their microbiome?
Yeah, I mean, really starting with those recommendations. If you feel like you have, your gut health is off a little bit, or you really want to focus on this element of your preconception health, focusing on how you're putting food into your body and what you're putting into your body. And just remembering that this is such a potent season of life to really focus on how we can better nourish and care for our bodies. Even if you think you're years away from wanting to get pregnant, or if you're really actively trying to get pregnant, that taking the space to lovingly nurture your body and tend to your health and prepare for this really big shift in your life is beneficial, and it will pay off, not only for the process of getting pregnant, but for the many years to come. And yeah, remembering that your body is wise and fertile and capable of greatness.
Beautiful.
Mhm. Yeah.
And if people want to learn more about you and what you do, what is the best way to find you? Where can people find you?
Yeah, I'm probably most active on Instagram. So my Instagram is just at Dr. Kelsey Stang, DrKelsey Stang. My website is also the same, so www.drkelseystang.com. Those are probably the two best places to find me.
Amazing. And do you have any like current offerings or things
Mhm.
that people should know about?
Yeah, I am always offering my Fertile Future program, which is currently it's a 6-week or 12-week program really focused on individualized support for optimizing fertility health. We dive into hormone balance and gut health really as the lens to, optimizing health for a future pregnancy. So that program I'm always enrolling. It's not like you know, a pulsed offering. It's always available for folks who are ready to take more of a deep dive into their preconception health.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on here and sharing your story and your wisdom. I will make sure that I paste all the links in the show notes so that people know where they can find you.
Great.
And I'm just really grateful that we connected and that you came here to share so much knowledge about the microbiome that people really deserve.
Oh, thank you so much for hosting this really, really informative and educational podcast. I really appreciate the work that you're doing and holding space for people to learn about this important stuff. Mhm.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, this wraps up today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. Want to know more about me? The best way to reach me is via @CycleSeeds on Instagram. And if you heard something today and you think, oh my God, wow, I learned something new, feel free to share the podcast on your social media and tag me. Or leave a review or rating. In this way, you help me reach more people like you. Thank you so much.